I was born into privilege, a member of a wealthy and influential family in Tyrone, Ireland. Yet, privilege does not shield one from loneliness. As the younger of two daughters, my childhood was spent mostly in solitude. My sister, 6 years my senior, was already poised for a life of her own. I recall her wedding day vividly, a joyous event for everyone but me. As the laughter and songs filled the air, I found myself grappling with the sorrow of losing my closest companion. My sister, who had always treated me with a kindness my parents never could muster, left our home to start her new life in Dublin with her husband, Mr. Carew. Her departure marked the beginning of an even lonelier chapter for me. My parents, disappointed by their lack of a male heir, treated me with indifference. They wanted sons, not daughters, and their disinterest in me was palpable. The year following my sister's wedding brought devastating news. A letter arrived from Mr. Carew, informing us of my sister's illness. Despite my sadness for her condition, I was secretly thrilled at the prospect of her return. I waited eagerly for her arrival, but the night she was supposed to come home, something eerie happened. At around midnight, I heard distant cries. My father and I rushed to the door, expecting to see her, but there was no one there. The cries continued, faint and haunting, until they abruptly stopped. The next day we received the news. My sister had passed away at precisely the moment we had heard those cries. For 2 years, I was consumed by grief. My world became a gray, lifeless place. My parents' lack of affection only deepened my sorrow, and Mr. Carew's swift remarriage filled me with anger. It seemed my sister had been forgotten so easily. Then, at just 14 years old, I became the object of attention for potential suitors, drawn to my family's wealth and status. I despised their advances and felt far too young for marriage. But when I turned 16, my mother took matters into her own hands. She brought me to Dublin, a bustling city far removed from the quiet of Tyrone. There, she said, I would meet richer, more interesting men. To my surprise, I began to enjoy the lively social scene. I danced, laughed, and found myself once again able to smile. Yet my mother's intentions were clear. She wanted me married, and soon. When she introduced me to Lord Glenfallen, a wealthy but much older man, I was appalled. He was kind and intelligent, but I didn't love him. Still, under pressure from my mother, I reluctantly agreed to the match. Thus, my life took another turn as I became Lady Glenfallen and left Tyrone behind. Carilla, my husband's grand estate, was breathtaking. Nestled by a river and surrounded by lush gardens, it seemed like a paradise. The house buzzed with life, servants sang as they worked, and the air was filled with the sense of blooming flowers and fresh fires. But even amidst this beauty, I felt an undercurrent of unease. My husband, once cheerful and engaging, grew distant and somber the moment we arrived. His change in demeanor was unsettling. Martha, the housekeeper, greeted me warmly and showed me around the sprawling estate. But when we reached my bedroom, something inexplicable happened. As the door opened, I saw a black coat hanging in the room. It looked as though no one was wearing it, yet it stood upright, almost as if it were alive. I recoiled in fear. Martha's face turned pale when I mentioned the coat. She whispered a chilling warning: whenever someone sees the black coat in the house, tragedy follows. The next morning, my husband took me on a tour of the grounds. Though I tried to enjoy the beauty of Carilla, his mood cast a shadow over our walk. At one point he turned to me, his face pale, and issued a strange command. I was never to enter the back rooms of the house or the small garden by the back door. His tone was so grave that I couldn't bring myself to question him, though his words lingered in my mind. What was he hiding? Why was he so afraid? One sunny afternoon, I decided to fetch my coat from my bedroom before a walk in the garden. As I entered the room, I was startled to find a woman sitting by the fire. She was dressed in black, her face pale and her eyes milky white. She was blind. The sight of her froze me in place. When I addressed her, she responded with an eerie calmness. She claimed to be the true Lady Glenfallen and demanded to see my husband. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I confronted my husband about the strange woman, but he refused to speak of her. His silence only deepened my unease. Over the following days, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He avoided me, spending hours staring into the fire with a haunted look in his eyes. I could no longer ignore the tension that seemed to suffocate the very air of Kurilla. As the days passed, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman in black. Her face, so devoid of life yet so strikingly present, haunted my thoughts. Was she truly who she claimed to be? Why would she come now, and what did she want from us? Her demand to see my husband weighed heavily on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she held a truth I wasn't ready to face. One night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, I began to hear whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind rustling through the trees outside, but the sound grew clearer. "Why are you here?" the voice seemed to ask, faint but unmistakable. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. My bedroom, once a haven, now felt like a prison. The next day, I sought out Martha, hoping for some clarity. Her face grew pale as I described the woman I had seen. She urged me to stay away from the back rooms and not to linger in the hallways at night. "The lady in black is a warning," she said, her voice trembling. "She appears only when the house is on the brink of tragedy." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. What tragedy was she referring to? Later that evening, I found myself drawn to the sitting room where I had first encountered the woman in black. The fire was burning low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. I stood in the doorway, reluctant to enter, when a sudden gust of wind extinguished the flames. The room plunged into darkness, and I heard soft, deliberate footsteps approaching. My breath caught in my throat. "Leave this house," a voice commanded. It was unmistakably hers. I turned to run but tripped over the edge of the rug, landing hard on the wooden floor. When I looked up, the woman in black was standing over me. Her pale face loomed closer as she leaned down, her blind eyes unseeing yet eerily focused. "You do not belong here," she whispered. "He has lied to you." Before I could respond, the sound of the door slamming broke the spell. My husband stood there, his face a mask of anger and fear. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, pulling me to my feet. He glared at the empty space where the woman had stood moments ago, though I could tell he knew exactly who had been there. Without another word, he dragged me back to our bedroom, locking the door behind us. "You must never go into that room again," he said, his voice shaking. "Do you understand me?" I nodded, too terrified to argue. But his reaction only confirmed my suspicions. He was hiding something, something that tied him to the lady in black. And I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind, set my nerves on edge. I lay awake, clutching the blankets tightly around me, my mind racing with questions. Who was the lady in black? What had my husband done to provoke her wrath? And why did I feel as though I was at the center of it all? The answers, I feared, would not come easily. But I knew one thing for certain. Kurilla was no longer just my home. It was a place of secrets, and those secrets were beginning to unravel. Sunny afternoon, I decided to fetch my coat from my bedroom before a walk in the garden. As I entered the room, I was startled to find a woman sitting by the fire. She was dressed in black, her face pale and her eyes milky white. She was blind. The sight of her froze me in place. When I addressed her, she responded with an eerie calmness. She claimed to be the true Lady Glenfallen and demanded to see my husband. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I confronted my husband about the strange woman, but he refused to speak of her. His silence only deepened my unease. Over the following days, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He avoided me, spending hours staring into the fire with a haunted look in his eyes. I could no longer ignore the tension that seemed to suffocate the very air of Kurilla. Desperate for answers, I turned to Martha. What she told me shattered the fragile sense of safety I clung to. With a trembling voice, Martha revealed that the blind woman in the black coat was not among the living. She was a ghost, the spirit of my husband's first wife, Lady Eliza Fallon. Eliza's death had been shrouded in whispers of deceit and murder. Martha, who had served Kurilla for decades, hesitated before divulging what she knew. They say she met her end in that very house, Martha confided, her face pale. She vanished one stormy night, and the next morning, her lifeless body was found floating in the river behind the garden. A cold dread settled over me. And my husband? What was his role in this? I asked, my voice trembling. Martha hesitated, then whispered, "It's said that he was the last person to see her alive. Some believe she fell into the river, but others." She trailed off, looking away. The villagers speak of screams that echoed through the house that night, of shadows moving in the garden. They think he pushed her. I felt the room spin as the weight of Martha's words sank in. My husband, a man I had trusted however reluctantly, was now entangled in a web of suspicion and malice. Could he truly be a murderer? The thought churned my stomach, and I felt a gnawing sense of betrayal. The more Martha spoke, the more the pieces of Kurilla's dark past began to fall into place. She explained how Eliza's spirit had become a harbinger of doom, appearing whenever tragedy loomed over the house. "She doesn't rest," Martha said. "She seeks justice, or vengeance. Perhaps both." That night, I confronted my husband. He sat in his study, the firelight casting deep shadows across his face. "Who was Lady Eliza?" I demanded, clutching the edges of my shawl as if it could protect me from the storm of emotions brewing inside me. His reaction was immediate and telling. His face blanched, and his hands trembled as he set his glass of whiskey down. "I told you not to speak of her," he said through gritted teeth. But I refused to back down. "I have seen her," I said, my voice rising with anger and fear. "She claims she is the true Lady Glenfallen. What does she mean by that? And what happened to her? Did you harm her? For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he admitted, Eliza and I had a turbulent marriage. She wasn't well. There were arguments, yes, but I never laid a hand on her. That night, I don't know what happened. I found her by the river, already gone. His words did little to comfort me. If anything, his evasive tone deepened my mistrust. Could he truly be innocent, or was he merely a skilled liar? The memories of Eliza's ghost, her haunting presence, and her chilling words seemed to suggest otherwise. She doesn't believe you, I said, watching him carefully. And neither do I. The days that followed were a blur of fear and unease. I found myself avoiding my husband, unable to shake the feeling that he was keeping even darker secrets from me. I began to explore the house in secret, hoping to uncover more about Eliza's life and untimely death. Hidden in the back of an old wardrobe, I discovered a box filled with her belongings, letters, trinkets, and a diary. The diary was tattered, its pages yellowed with age, but it was a window into her tormented soul. Her entries painted a picture of a woman trapped in a loveless and increasingly dangerous marriage. He watches me, one entry read. Even when I sleep, I feel his eyes on me. Does he wish me harm? Another entry, written shortly before her death, chilled me to the core. If I die, it will be no accident. As I read her words, I felt a deep kinship with Eliza. Though separated by years, we were both women caught in the same web of deception and fear. Her ghostly warnings began to make sense. She wasn't merely haunting Carilla, she was trying to protect me from suffering the same fate she had. One stormy evening, I sat alone in the sitting room, the diary open on my lap. Lightning illuminated the darkened room as I read Eliza's final entry. He has planned something. I can see it in his eyes. If I disappear, let my voice be heard. Let my story be known. A sudden gust of wind blew the pages of the diary shut, and I looked up to find the room eerily silent. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, Eliza, the lady in black, standing in the doorway. Her milky eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and her lips moved soundlessly. I felt a chill run down my spine as she pointed toward the window. Following her gesture, I saw a figure moving in the garden below. It was my husband. Clutching the diary tightly, I realized that Eliza's story was far from over, and neither was mine. The truth about Carilla, its dark secrets, and its haunted past would not stay buried. I was determined to uncover the full extent of my husband's sins, no matter the cost. The events of that night are etched into my memory with a clarity that refuses to fade. It began as I lay in bed, tossing and turning, unable to find solace in sleep. The air in the room felt heavy, oppressive, as though unseen eyes were watching me. When I finally succumbed to exhaustion, it was not long before I was jolted awake by an icy chill that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. There, at the foot of my bed, stood the lady in black. Her form was as haunting as ever, her pale face illuminated by the flickering light of a lantern she held in one hand. In the other, she gripped a knife, its blade catching the faint glow and reflecting a sinister gleam. Her milky, sightless eyes seemed to pierce through me, and her presence filled the room with an unearthly stillness. "You," she began, her voice calm but laced with menace, "do you truly claim to be Lady Glenfallen?" My voice trembled as I answered, "Yes, I am married to Lord Glenfallen." Her expression remained unreadable, but her grip on the knife tightened. "Then you are a liar," she said coldly. "I am his true wife, and you have no place here." A shiver ran down my spine as her words sank in. The claim she made was both impossible and terrifying. "You cannot be," I whispered, barely able to speak. You are no longer among the living." She leaned closer, the lantern casting eerie shadows on the walls. "And yet here I stand." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint crackle of the dying fire in the hearth. She raised the knife, not in threat but as though it were an extension of her anguish. "Leave Karilla," she said, her tone now tinged with desperation. "If you stay, you will suffer as I have. He will destroy you, just as he destroyed me." I wanted to scream, to flee, but my body refused to move. "What did he do to you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Her face twisted in a mixture of rage and sorrow. "He lied. He betrayed. And when I confronted him, he silenced me." Her words hung in the air, each syllable dripping with bitterness. "You are nothing more than his next victim." Suddenly, the lantern she held flickered violently, the light growing dimmer as though suffocated by her presence. "This is your only warning," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "Leave this place, or you will share my fate." With that she vanished, the lantern extinguishing itself and plunging the room into darkness. I was left alone, trembling and clutching the blanket as though it could protect me from the chilling truth of her words. The atmosphere in the room was oppressive, and every shadow seemed to take on a life of its own. I could still feel the cold where she had stood, and her voice lingered in my ears like a dreadful melody. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear. Sleep was an impossible luxury, and every creak of the house sent my heart racing. By morning, I resolved to confront my husband once and for all, though deep down, I knew that the answers I sought might only deepen the terror that had gripped my life. Terrified, I packed my belongings and left Karilla the next morning. I returned to my parents' home in Tyrone, seeking solace in the familiar. Though my relationship with them had always been strained, I found comfort in their presence. My nights were haunted by dreams of the blind woman, but I felt safer far away from Karilla. Even in Tyrone, I could not escape the spectral presence of the blind woman. My late sister's spirit began to visit me, warning me of the blind woman's jealousy and her desire to harm me. These encounters, though unsettling, felt oddly comforting. My sister's ghost seemed to protect me from harm. The story of Karilla and its haunted past stayed with me. I learned that the estate had a long history of tragedy, with each Lady Glenfallen meeting a mysterious and untimely end. The weight of this legacy bore heavily on my mind, but I resolved to break free from its grasp. Over time, I began to rebuild my life. I found solace in simple pleasures and the support of those around me. Though the memories of Karilla lingered, I refused to let them define me. I wrote down my experiences, hoping that sharing my story would serve as a warning to others. Now, as I sit by the fire in my childhood home, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. Karilla remains a part of my past, a dark chapter that shaped the person I have become. Though the ghost of the blind woman still haunts my dreams, I have found peace in the knowledge that I survived her wrath. And with each passing day, I grow stronger, determined to live a life unburdened by the shadows of the past.